They say money can't buy happiness. But for my family, it got something far worse. A nightmare. A nightmare that began the day my grandmother, Elara, drew her last breath. Little did we know, her death wasn't just the end of an era. It was the beginning of a war. A war for a fortune nobody even knew existed. And a betrayal that shook our family to its very core. You think you know your loved ones? Think again, because sometimes the most dangerous secrets are buried not in the ground, but in the hearts of those closest to you. Before we dive into this wild ride, if you're ready for a story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about family, hit that like button right now. And if you want to be the first to hear more mind-blowing family dramas like this, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.
For decades, our family was a carefully curated portrait of success and harmony, or so it appeared from the outside looking in. My grandmother, Elara Vance, was the undisputed matriarch, a woman forged from steel and draped in silk. She was sharp as a tack, incredibly driven, and possessed an uncanny knack for business. Starting from a single, small art studio, she meticulously built a formidable empire, a chain of high-end art galleries that stretched across the state, each one a testament to her vision and relentless work ethic. She was admired, respected, and, in her own formidable way, loved. She had 3 children, each as different as night and day. There was Aunt Beatrice, the eldest, always impeccably dressed, her every movement precise, her eyes possessing a keen, almost calculating glint that missed nothing. She'd followed in Elara's footsteps, managing the flagship gallery in the city. Then came Uncle Marcus, the charming middle child, a true silver-tongued devil. He could talk his way into or out of anything. He managed the more modern, avant-garde galleries, his charisma masking a casual disregard for details. And finally, there was my mother, Eleanor, the youngest, a gentle soul, almost ethereal in her quiet demeanor, who found her solace and passion not in the cutthroat world of business, but in the meditative strokes of a paintbrush. She was the family's artist, often seen as a dreamer, perhaps even a bit naive by Beatrice and Marcus. My earliest memories are bathed in the warm glow of Elara's sprawling, antique-filled mansion. Sunday dinners were legendary affairs. The grand dining room would echo with laughter, the rich aroma of Elara's famous rosemary roasted chicken mingling with the clinking of crystal champagne glasses. Family holidays were elaborate, joyous occasions filled with gifts, music, and an underlying sense of unity. We all grew up with the unspoken understanding, the ingrained belief that Elara's considerable wealth, her legacy, would one day be divided equally among her 3 children. It was the bedrock of our collective future, the promise of security that allowed us all to dream without fear of financial ruin. What else could a loving, fair mother possibly do?
But as Elara's years began to truly weigh on her, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift occurred. She became more withdrawn, her vibrant energy slowly dimming. She'd spend increasingly long hours cloistered away in her private study, the door often closed, the faint scratching of her pen on paper the only sound emanating from within. Whispers began to circulate among the extended family, hushed theories exchanged over hushed phone calls. Some speculated she was simply succumbing to the natural wear of old age, that her formidable mind was finally beginning to dull. Others, more cynically, whispered about hidden ailments, or perhaps a growing eccentricity that came with immense wealth and solitude. My mother, ever the optimist, dismissed it all as Elara finally embracing her well-deserved solitude, finding peace in her private sanctuary. But Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Marcus, ever the pragmatists, with their sharp financial instincts, started asking more pointed, increasingly insistent questions about Elara's financial dealings. They wanted to know about new investments, about unusual expenditures, about the succession plan for the galleries. Questions that Elara, with her characteristic wit and evasiveness, always artfully deflected, her answers as slippery as quicksilver. She'd laugh them off, change the subject, or simply dismiss their concerns with a wave of her hand saying, "My affairs are precisely that, my affairs." A growing unease settled over the family, a quiet tension simmering beneath the surface of our polished facade. Then, just last year, the inevitable, yet still profoundly shocking, happened. Elara passed away peacefully in her sleep, a quiet end for such a dynamic life. The funeral was a somber, heavily attended affair, a blend of genuine, heartfelt grief from those who truly loved her, and an almost palpable undercurrent of nervous, anxious anticipation from others. Everyone knew what was coming next, the highly anticipated and potentially life-altering reading of the will. This wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, about respect, about what each of us believed we were rightfully owed after a lifetime of devotion, or at least proximity, to Elara's fortune. My immediate family, a tight knot of hushed whispers and barely concealed excitement, gathered in that very living room you saw earlier, the same room that had witnessed so many joyous celebrations, now thick with the weight of expectation. We sat there, each of us on the edge of our seats, waiting for the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, to arrive. We thought we were prepared for anything. We believed we had braced ourselves for every possible outcome. We were so profoundly wrong.
The air in Elara's grand living room was thick, almost suffocating with anticipation. Every breath felt amplified. Every rustle of clothing seemed to echo. Mr. Henderson, Elara's long-time, rather stoic and impeccably composed lawyer, cleared his throat, the sound a crisp punctuation mark in the heavy silence. He began to read, his voice a low, monotonous drone, reciting the familiar yet strangely alien legal jargon. We sat rigid, nodding almost imperceptibly as he went through the initial, expected clauses. Generous charitable donations to Elara's favorite art foundations, modest bequests to distant, almost forgotten relatives, and even a sizable sum set aside for the upkeep of her beloved rose garden. We breathed a collective sigh of relief. It all seemed perfectly conventional, exactly as Elara would have done. Then he got to the main distribution, the part everyone had been holding their breath for. To Beatrice Vance, my eldest daughter, I leave a trust fund of $1 million and the summer cottage in Nantucket, a place where she can finally learn to relax. Aunt Beatrice, ever so composed despite the obvious satisfaction gleaming in her eyes, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. Her lips curved into a subtle, knowing smile. To Marcus Vance, my charming son, I leave a trust fund of $1 million and the shares in the gallery chain and the Northern District, a challenge I trust he will rise to. Uncle Marcus, despite his usually smooth exterior, couldn't help but crack a more pronounced, triumphant smile. My mother, Eleanor, and I exchanged a reassuring, almost celebratory glance. It seemed, finally, everything was unfolding exactly as we had all expected, as it was meant to be. The tension in the room began to ease.
Then, just as we were settling into a comfortable sense of resolution, Mr. Henderson paused. He deliberately adjusted his spectacles, took a slow, measured breath, and continued, his voice now imbued with a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in tone, as if preparing for a crucial announcement. And to Eleanor Vance, my beloved youngest daughter, I bequeath the remaining assets of the Vance Art Gallery chain, the esteemed family mansion, and the entirety of my personal priceless art collection, on the express condition that she fulfills the specific undertaking outlined in Appendix C of this will. A collective, sharp gasp ripped through the room, a sound of profound shock and disbelief. My mother's jaw dropped, her serene expression instantly replaced by one of utter bewilderment. Aunt Beatrice's carefully constructed composure shattered instantly, her face turning a furious, mottled shade of crimson. Uncle Marcus's triumphant, confident smirk evaporated, replaced by a look of bewildered, almost comic fury. The room, which moments before had been filled with hushed anticipation, erupted into a cacophony of whispers, then indignant shouts. "A condition?" Aunt Beatrice shrieked, her voice high-pitched and raw with outrage, completely unlike her usual controlled tone. "What kind of condition? This is preposterous!" Uncle Marcus slammed his fist on the polished mahogany table, making the crystal decanters jump. "This is an insult, a trick. Elara was always playing games." Mr. Henderson, however, remained utterly unperturbed, a rock in the rising tide of family chaos. He calmly turned to the thick, sealed envelope labeled Appendix C. And that, my friends, is when the true, earth-shattering bombshell dropped. Elara, my seemingly conventional, predictable grandmother, the paragon of decorum, had harbored a secret so profound, so meticulously buried beneath decades of carefully constructed reputation, that it threatened to unravel everything we thought we knew about her, and indeed, about our entire family lineage.
Appendix C states that for Eleanor to inherit the bulk of the estate, Mr. Henderson read, his voice unwavering, carrying every word with chilling clarity over the rising din of protests. She must prove, within 1 year from the date of my passing, that she has successfully located and established a personal relationship with Elara Vance's firstborn child, a son named Arthur, who was given up for adoption shortly after his birth in Paris in 1955. This is not merely a suggestion, but a binding, non-negotiable stipulation of this will. The silence that followed this pronouncement was deafening, a vacuum created by the sheer magnitude of the revelation. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about a hidden child, a secret brother, a forgotten past that reached out from the grave to grasp our present. My mother, Eleanor, utterly blindsided and overwhelmed, collapsed back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of anger or greed. They were tears of profound, overwhelming shock and a strange, deep, newfound grief for a mother she suddenly realized she never truly knew, a mother who had carried such an immense, heartbreaking secret. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Marcus were incandescent with a rage that bordered on madness. They immediately launched into a tirade, their voices overlapping in a furious crescendo. They accused Elara of being a manipulative, cruel, even vindictive woman. They accused my mother of conspiring with Elara, of somehow influencing her, of secretly orchestrating this elaborate scheme to cut them out of their rightful inheritance. The family, once a carefully constructed picture of harmony and unity, devolved into a screaming match, each accusation more venomous, more personal, more devastating than the last. The air crackled with bitterness and betrayal. My grandmother, even in death, had orchestrated the ultimate family drama. A final, devastating act that didn't just expose the deepest cracks in our foundation, but utterly shattered it into a million irreparable pieces.
The initial cataclysmic shock of Elara's final revelation eventually, slowly gave way to a chilling, undeniable reality. My mother, Eleanor, was faced with a task that felt utterly impossible, a 1-year deadline, a ticking clock to locate a brother she never knew existed, born in a foreign country, given up for adoption almost 70 years ago with virtually no information. It was like being told to find a single grain of sand on an endless beach. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Marcus, still seething with a potent cocktail of resentment and wounded pride, wasted no time. Within days, they had both retained formidable legal counsel, launching an aggressive campaign to contest the will. Their arguments were fervent and varied. Elara was of unsound mind, they claimed, prone to eccentricities in her later years. Or, perhaps, the condition was an undue influence, designed specifically and maliciously to exclude them from the fortune they felt was their birthright. They painted my mother as a scheming opportunist, desperate to hoard the wealth. But Mr. Henderson, with his unshakable calm and meticulous preparation, systematically dismantled their claims. He presented irrefutable evidence that Elara had been of perfectly sound mind when she drafted and signed the will, and that the condition, while unusual, was entirely legal and binding. The will, to their fury, was ironclad. Despite the legal onslaught and her own profound heartbreak, my mother, Eleanor, found within herself a new, quiet resolve. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It transcended mere money. This was about honoring her mother's deeply hidden final wish, about understanding the woman Elara truly was, and most powerfully, about finding her own lost brother, a missing piece of their shattered family puzzle. And so I became her constant companion, her tireless research assistant, her emotional support, and on occasion her human punching bag when the sheer scale of the task became too overwhelming. Our search began in the most obvious places, quickly devolving into the maddeningly obscure. We delved into dusty archives, sifting through brittle old birth records. We spent endless, eye-straining hours poring over microfilm in library basements, the whirring of the machines a monotonous soundtrack to our desperate quest. We navigated the labyrinthine depths of online genealogy databases, cross-referencing names, dates, and even vague geographical locations. Paris, 1955. It was a needle in a colossal haystack, a mere whisper in a hurricane of historical data. We chased every flicker of a lead, every tenuous connection, only to hit dead end after dead end. Every promising thread we pulled dissolved into disheartening disappointment, leaving us exhausted and increasingly despairing.
The constant legal battles waged by Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Marcus only intensified the pressure. They didn't just attack the will, they started a vicious smear campaign, spreading insidious rumors throughout our extended social circles, attempting to tarnish my mother's reputation. They implied she was manipulative, that she had somehow coerced Elara in her final days, even that she had known about this secret child all along and kept it hidden. The family, once a symbol of unity, was now brutally fractured, divided into bitter, warring factions. Even distant relatives, once polite acquaintances, took sides, fueled by the relentless gossip and the sheer audacity of Elara's final, dramatic act. The grand Sunday dinners, once a cherished tradition, were a distant, poignant memory. The mansion, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like a cold, empty museum, echoing with unspoken resentments. Days bled into weeks, weeks into agonizing months. The one-year deadline loomed over us like a dark, gathering storm cloud, its shadow lengthening with each passing day. My mother grew visibly gaunt, her usually vibrant spirit often wavering, flickering like a dying candle. There were countless moments she wanted to simply give up, to concede defeat, to let Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Marcus claim the fortune and end the torment. But then she would look at Elara's stern yet knowing portrait, or pick up a faded photograph of a young, hopeful Elara, and a tiny flicker of fierce determination would reignite in her weary eyes. She wouldn't have given me this impossible task if she didn't believe, truly believe I could do it. It was her mantra, her desperate anchor in a sea of doubt. Just when hope was beginning to dwindle to a mere ember, when we were on the very precipice of admitting utter defeat, a tiny, almost imperceptible clue emerged from the dusty depths of a long-forgotten Paris archive. It was a midwife's faded, brittle diary, meticulously detailing births in a small, private clinic nestled in the quiet, artistic neighborhood of Montmartre. The entry for 1955 was brief, almost mundane, yet contained a crucial detail. It mentioned an American mother who wished for her child to have a better life, and, miraculously, a single identifying characteristic. The baby had a distinctive birthmark, a small, star-shaped mark on his left shoulder blade. It was a long shot, a whisper of possibility in a deafening silence. But it was something. It was enough.
Armed with this single, fragile clue, this thread of hope pulled from the forgotten past, my mother and I didn't hesitate. We booked the next available flight to Paris. The city of lights, the city of romance, but for us, it was the city where our family's darkest, most profound secret was born. We felt a strange, exhilarating mix of hope and trepidation. What if this was another cruel dead end, another false dawn in our relentless search? What if we found him and he wanted nothing to do with us, nothing to do with this bizarre, newly revealed family drama? What if he was long gone, a ghost of a ghost? Our frantic search in Paris led us down narrow, winding cobblestone streets, past charming bakeries and bustling markets. We navigated the maze of ancient arrondissements, venturing into quiet, forgotten neighborhoods that felt untouched by time. We visited the decaying facades of old clinics, some now transformed into apartments, others crumbling relics of a bygone era. We spoke to incredibly elderly residents, their memories fragile as spun glass, hoping for a fleeting spark of recognition, anything that could connect us to the past. It was like chasing a ghost through the labyrinthine alleys of history, clutching on to a whispered name and a faded date. Then, through sheer, unyielding persistence, fueled by dwindling time and the immense emotional weight of the inheritance, and a stroke of truly incredible, almost cinematic luck, we found her. Not Arthur, not yet, but a woman, now in her late 80s, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, who had worked as the clinic's receptionist in 1955. Her memory, while fragile, held pockets of surprising clarity. When my mother painstakingly described Elara, her youth, her distress, a flicker of profound recognition crossed the old woman's eyes. She remembered the young American woman, so distraught, yet so resolutely determined, who had given up her baby for adoption, her heart breaking even as she made the difficult choice. And she remembered, with chilling precision, the small, star-shaped birthmark.
The old receptionist, touched by my mother's raw vulnerability and persistent hope, gave us a name, a city, and, incredibly, a recent address. Not the name Arthur, which Elara had given him at birth, but the name he had been given by his adoptive, loving French parents, Jean-Pierre Dubois. And he was still living in France, a quiet life in the serene countryside. With hearts pounding like war drums, a mixture of terror and overwhelming exhilaration, we took a train from the bustling heart of Paris to a quiet, picturesque village nestled deep in the French countryside. We found the address, a small, charming house, its stone facade draped in climbing roses, a vibrant garden blooming in the front. We walked up the cobblestone path, our hands trembling as we raised them to knock on the weathered wooden door. An elderly man, with kind, weary eyes and a face etched with the quiet dignity of a lifetime, opened it. And there it was, barely visible beneath the collar of his simple shirt, a small, star-shaped birthmark on his left shoulder blade. Our breath hitched. "Monsieur Dubois?" my mother asked, her voice a barely audible whisper, thick with emotion. He nodded slowly, a questioning, slightly bewildered look on his face as he took in our hopeful, tear-streaked expressions. "My name is Elara Vance," my mother continued, tears finally welling in her eyes, cascading freely down her cheeks. I believe I'm your sister. Your mother, our mother, was Elara Vance." The look on his face transformed. It was a complex, almost painful mixture of utter disbelief, profound confusion, and then a flicker of something deeply, profoundly sad, something ancient and deeply buried that seemed to recognize a truth it had long since forgotten. He invited us in, his initial shock giving way to a quiet, almost resigned curiosity. For hours, we sat in his quiet, book-filled living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, as my mother meticulously, gently unraveled a lifetime of secrets. He listened with an incredible, dignified patience as my mother explained everything. Elara, the will, the impossible condition, the frantic transatlantic search. He confirmed his adoption, showing us his faded adoption papers, confirming the dates, confirming the distinct birthmark. The truth finally, undeniably stood before us. Elara had given him up because she was young, unmarried, and facing immense societal pressure from her conservative, aristocratic family back in America. It was a decision, my mother explained, that had clearly haunted Elara for decades, a crushing secret she carried to her grave, and her final, desperate attempt to right a perceived lifelong wrong.
We returned to America, Jean-Pierre in tow. Just days, mere hours, it felt like, before the one-year deadline slammed shut. His very presence was enough to fulfill the stringent condition of the will. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Marcus, when confronted with the irrefutable evidence, were incandescent with a rage that burned hotter than ever before. But this time, their fury was futile. They had no legal recourse. The will was crystalline clear, the condition meticulously met. Their lawyers confirmed it. The battle was over. The fortune, the mansion, the galleries, they now belonged to Eleanor. But the story, as so many family sagas do, doesn't simply end with a legal victory. The fortune was inherited, yes, but the true inheritance, the lasting legacy of Elara's final act, wasn't the vast sums of money or the valuable art collection. It was the raw, undeniable truth, the shocking, painful truth that utterly shattered our illusions of a perfect, harmonious family. Jean-Pierre, a gentle, quiet soul, found himself profoundly overwhelmed by the sudden, dramatic intrusion of this wealthy, fractured American family into his peaceful, unassuming life. He eventually decided to return to his beloved, quiet life in France, accepting a modest but substantial share of the inheritance, but ultimately valuing his peace, his solitude, and his simple life above all else. He was a man who had found his happiness without a hidden fortune, and he continued to live that way. The family, as we had known it, was never truly the same. The fragile bonds of trust were broken irreparably. The bitterness and resentment festered, lingering like a toxic cloud. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Marcus, consumed by their greed and the burning injustice they felt, eventually distanced themselves almost entirely. Their relationships with my mother and with each other proved irreparable. My mother, Eleanor, found a profound sense of closure, a deep understanding of her mother she never thought possible, but also a deep, lingering sorrow for the years lost, for the immense burden of secrets her mother carried alone. The inheritance, this vast fortune, brought wealth beyond measure,
But it also brought a fractured family, a devastating legacy of secrets, and the chilling realization that even the most well-meaning, desperate intentions can lead to the most profound and devastating consequences, echoing through generations.
So, what do you think? Was Elara's final audacious act a stroke of manipulative genius? A desperate, heart-wrenching attempt to right a profound past wrong? Or simply a cruel game designed to test her children? Did my mother do the right thing by pursuing the truth, even if it meant tearing our family apart, perhaps beyond repair? Let me know all your thoughts, your theories, your judgments in the comments below. I want to hear your take on this incredible, heartbreaking, and utterly unforgettable story. And if you were as gripped by this twisting, turning tale as I was telling it, if it made you gasp or even shed a tear, please give this video a huge thumbs up. It truly, truly helps the channel grow and allows me to bring you more unbelievable, real-life family drama stories that will leave you stunned. Don't forget to subscribe to Drama and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next deep dive into the shocking, hidden secrets families keep buried. Until next time, remember, the truth is often stranger and far more dramatic than any fiction you could ever imagine.